The morning sun cast long shadows across the sleek aircraft parked at Philadelphia International Airport's Terminal C. The crisp autumn air carried the familiar scent of jet fuel as Flight Captain Michael Chen walked around his Boeing 787, performing his usual pre-flight inspection. His experienced eyes scanned every detail of the massive aircraft, from the sturdy landing gear to the elegant sweep of the wings. 20 years of flying had taught him to never rush this crucial routine. He moved with practiced precision, his fingers trailing along the smooth metal surface as he checked each point on his digital tablet. His airline's latest addition to the fleet gleamed in the early morning light, its fresh paint job reflecting the sunrise like a mirror. Running a successful airline hadn't changed Michael's love for these quiet moments before a flight. Despite being the owner of the entire fleet, he still insisted on flying regular routes, believing that a good leader never loses touch with the heart of their operation. His crew respected him for it, and passengers often did double takes when they learned the pilot was also the owner of their airline. As he crouched down to inspect the landing gear, he heard quick footsteps approaching from behind. Before he could turn around, a sharp voice cut through the morning calm. "Hey, what do you think you're doing around that aircraft?" The voice belonged to Officer David Parker, a security officer known throughout the airport for his overzealous approach to his job. Michael straightened up slowly, his pilot's uniform crisp and professional, complete with 4 golden stripes on each shoulder. "Good morning, officer," he said calmly, reaching for his credentials. "I'm just completing my pre-flight checks. I'm the captain for this morning's flight to San Francisco." Officer Parker's face twisted with suspicion, his hand resting on his belt as he looked Michael up and down. "Sure you are," he scoffed, barely glancing at the ID being offered. "And I'm the President of the United States. Step away from the aircraft." Several ground crew members nearby stopped their work, watching the scene unfold. They knew exactly who Michael was, not just any captain, but the founder and owner of Pacific West Airlines, one of the most successful regional carriers in North America. George, a veteran mechanic, started to step forward to intervene, but Michael caught his eye and subtly shook his head. "Officer," Michael tried again, his voice steady and professional, "if you check with operations, they can confirm my identity. I'm scheduled to fly this aircraft in less than an hour. We have 238 passengers waiting to board." But Officer Parker wasn't listening. His face had grown redder with each word, his prejudices clearly clouding his judgment. "Listen here," he snapped, reaching for his handcuffs. "I've been working airport security for 15 years, and I know what a pilot looks like. You're going to need to come with me." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Michael. The very aircraft he was being accused of suspicious behavior around had his signature on every piece of paperwork, from its purchase order to its registration. Each rivet, each panel, each engine was technically his property. But at this moment, none of that mattered to Officer Parker, who saw only what his biases allowed him to see. As Parker roughly grabbed Michael's arm, more airport staff gathered around, their phones discreetly recording the incident. The morning sun continued to rise, illuminating the tail of the aircraft where the Pacific West Airlines logo stood proud. The very same logo that appeared on Michael's pilot's license, his business cards, and the documents in his office naming him as CEO. Little did Officer Parker know, but his next few hours would become a powerful lesson in humility, and his actions this morning would spark a change that would ripple through airport security protocols across the country. But for now, as the handcuffs clicked shut around Michael's wrists, he remained calm, knowing that sometimes the best teaching moments come from the most uncomfortable situations. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as more airport staff gathered around Terminal C. Officer Parker's grip on Michael's arm remained tight, his face set with stubborn determination. The morning bustle of the airport seemed to fade into the background as this scene unfolded, drawing concerned looks from passengers and airline employees alike. "I've been doing this job long enough to spot trouble," Officer Parker announced loudly, seemingly trying to justify his actions to the growing crowd. No one just walks around touching aircraft without proper authorization. His voice carried that unmistakable tone of someone who had already made up their mind, regardless of the evidence in front of them. Lisa, the lead flight attendant for the morning's flight, rushed forward with her phone in hand. "Officer, there's been a huge mistake. If you just let me show you." But Parker cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Ma'am, step back, or you'll be interfering with airport security procedures," he warned, his face flushed with authority. The gathered crowd murmured in disbelief, several phones now recording the unfolding drama. Michael remained remarkably composed, though his eyes reflected a mixture of disappointment and determination. "Officer Parker," he said calmly, using the name he'd read on the security badge, "I understand you're doing your job, but there are 238 passengers about to board this flight. Every minute we waste here affects their travel plans." A young gate agent nervously approached, holding up her tablet. "Sir, this is our CEO. He's literally on our company website. Look." But again, Parker wasn't interested in evidence that contradicted his assumptions. "Everyone step back," Parker commanded, his voice echoing across the terminal. "This is a security situation, and I won't have civilians interfering with protocol." The absurdity of the situation was starting to draw attention from other parts of the airport, with curious onlookers stopping to watch. Through the terminal windows, the morning sun continued to climb higher, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The massive Boeing 787, worth millions and owned by the very man being detained, sat silently witnessing the scene. Its freshly painted exterior gleamed, the company logo clearly visible. The same logo that appeared on Michael's pilot uniform and ID badge. George, the veteran mechanic, had worked at the airport for over 2 decades and had never seen anything quite like this. He quickly made some calls, knowing that this situation needed immediate attention from higher authorities. Meanwhile, other pilots and crew members who recognized Michael began gathering, their faces showing a mix of shock and concern. "You're making a serious mistake," Michael said quietly to Officer Parker, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the humiliating situation. "One phone call to the airline's headquarters, or even a simple internet search, would verify everything I've told you." But Parker's pride had taken over completely. "Save it for the station," he snapped, beginning to lead Michael away from the aircraft. "We'll sort out your story there." The handcuffs felt cold against Michael's wrists, a stark contrast to the warm morning air. As they walked through the terminal, passengers pulled out their phones, recording the unusual sight of a uniformed pilot being led away in handcuffs. Some recognized Michael from company advertisements and news features, adding to the mounting whispers and shocked expressions. The entire scene played out like a slow-motion movie, with every step echoing against the terminal's floor. Airport staff scrambled to contact higher authorities, knowing that this situation was spiraling into something much bigger than a routine security check. Little did Officer Parker know, but his next few minutes would completely change his perspective and his career. The evidence of his mistake was already spreading across social media, and the airline's executive team was about to descend on the airport police station like a thunderstorm. Sometimes the biggest lessons come wrapped in the most uncomfortable packages, and this morning was about to become a masterclass in humility and prejudice. The walk through the airport police station felt like an eternity. Officer Parker marched Michael past rows of desks, where other officers looked up from their paperwork with curious expressions. The morning sunlight filtered through barred windows, casting striped shadows across the worn linoleum floor. "Sit here," Parker commanded, pointing to a metal chair beside his desk. The handcuffs clinked against the chair's back as Michael carefully took his seat. His pilot's uniform, usually a symbol of respect and authority, now felt like a costume in this surreal situation. The 4 gold stripes on his shoulders caught the fluorescent light, a silent testimony to his 2 decades of flying experience. Back at Terminal C, chaos was erupting. The morning flight to San Francisco remained grounded, with passengers growing increasingly confused and frustrated. Flight attendants, and gate agents scrambled to manage the situation, trying to explain the delay without causing panic. "Has anyone reached the main office?" Lisa, the lead flight attendant, asked urgently. George, the mechanic who had witnessed everything, nodded vigorously. "They're already on their way." The whole executive team dropped everything when they heard. Meanwhile, at the police station, Officer Parker was typing up his report with 2 fingers, occasionally glancing at Michael with suspicious eyes. "So you expect me to believe that someone like you owns an entire airline?" he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. Michael sat straight in his chair, maintaining his dignity despite the circumstances. "Officer, a simple phone call would clear this up immediately. You're not just delaying me. You're affecting hundreds of passengers and crew members." The station's front door suddenly burst open. A group of well-dressed individuals strode in, led by a woman in a sharp business suit. Officer Parker looked up, annoyance clear on his face until he noticed their expressions and the airline logos on their badges. "I'm Catherine Walsh, Chief Operations Officer of Pacific West Airlines," the woman announced, her voice carrying across the room. "And you have our CEO in handcuffs." The color drained from Officer Parker's face as she placed a stack of documents on his desk. "These are copies of our company registration, Mr. Chen's pilot licenses, his FAA certifications, and documentation of ownership for every aircraft in our fleet, including the one he was inspecting this morning," she continued, spreading out the papers. Other officers had stopped their work, watching the scene unfold. The station captain emerged from his office, quickly assessing the situation. "Officer Parker, remove those handcuffs immediately," he ordered, his face darkening with embarrassment. As Parker fumbled with the keys, his hands now shaking, the reality of his massive error began to sink in. Michael rubbed his wrists as the handcuffs came off, but his expression remained calm. The station had fallen completely silent, every eye fixed on the scene. Even the phones seemed to have stopped ringing, as if the whole building was holding its breath. "Sir, I didn't," Parker stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. The stack of documents on his desk told a story he couldn't deny. The man he'd arrested wasn't just any pilot, but the owner of a successful airline worth millions. The station captain stepped forward, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Chen, we sincerely apologize for this incident. I assure you, this will be thoroughly investigated." He shot a meaningful look at Officer Parker, who seemed to shrink in his chair. But Michael surprised everyone by raising his hand. "Before we go any further," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I'd like to suggest something different." The room remained silent, waiting. "Instead of focusing on punishment, let's talk about prevention. This incident could become a valuable learning opportunity for everyone in airport security." The tension in the room shifted slightly. Officer Parker, who had been expecting the worst, looked up with confusion and the first glimmer of hope. Sometimes the biggest mistakes open doors to the most important changes, and in this moment, a new chapter was about to begin, not just for one officer or one airport, but for the entire industry. The airport police station's conference room had never felt so crowded. The morning light streamed through dusty blinds as Catherine Walsh, the airline's chief operations officer, spread out more documents across the long table. The room buzzed with tension and whispered conversations as airline executives and police officials tried to make sense of the situation. Officer Parker sat at the far end of the table, his shoulders hunched, looking like he wanted to disappear into his chair. His hands, which had so confidently held those handcuffs earlier, now fidgeted nervously with a pen. The weight of his mistake pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. "Let me get this straight," the police captain said, rubbing his forehead. "Not only is Mr. Chen a licensed commercial pilot with over 20,000 flight hours, but he's also the founder and owner of Pacific West Airlines." He looked down at the paperwork again, as if the words might somehow change. Catherine nodded, pulling up the airline's website on her tablet. "Mr. Chen started the company 12 years ago with 2 small regional aircraft. Today, we operate 25 Boeing aircraft worth over $2 billion. She turned the tablet around, showing photos of Michael at various company events, cutting ribbons, shaking hands with city officials, standing proudly in front of newly acquired aircraft. The station captain's face grew redder with each new piece of information, and Officer Parker arrested him for inspecting his own airplane. The question hung in the air like heavy smoke. Several other officers in the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Michael, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "I think what matters now isn't the mistake itself, but how we respond to it." His voice carried a warmth that seemed to ease some of the tension in the room. "I've seen similar incidents across different airports, though usually not quite this dramatic." A few nervous chuckles broke the tension. Outside the conference room, word had spread quickly through the airport. Social media was already buzzing with videos of the arrest. The airline's customer service team was working overtime to handle a flood of messages and comments. But instead of anger, many of the responses showed support for how Michael was handling the situation. "We have an opportunity here," Michael continued, standing up to address the room. "This isn't just about one incident or one officer. It's about creating better training programs, improving communication, and building stronger relationships between airport security and airline staff." The police captain nodded eagerly, clearly relieved that Michael wasn't demanding immediate disciplinary action. "We would welcome any suggestions for improving our training protocols," he said, shooting a meaningful glance at Officer Parker. Catherine pulled out another set of documents. Training materials the airline had been developing for their own staff about communication and cooperation with airport security. "We could adapt these materials," she offered, "create something that works for both sides." Officer Parker, who had been silent until now, finally found his voice. I don't know what to say," he stammered, looking directly at Michael for the first time since the arrest. "I made assumptions. I didn't listen. I was completely wrong." The room fell quiet, waiting for Michael's response. He walked over to where Parker sat and did something unexpected. He extended his hand. "We all make mistakes, Officer Parker. The question is, are you willing to help make sure others don't make the same one?" Parker stared at the offered hand for a moment before standing up and shaking it firmly. His eyes were bright with what might have been tears. "Yes, sir. I'd like that very much." Someone from the back of the room started clapping, and soon others joined in. The morning's disaster was transforming into something else. A moment of change, a chance for growth. Through the conference room windows, they could see planes taking off and landing, a reminder of why they were all there. The incident that could have ended careers was instead becoming the catalyst for positive change. Sometimes the best lessons come from our biggest mistakes, and in that police station conference room, a new chapter in airport security training was about to begin. The next few days at Philadelphia International Airport felt different. The story of the airline owner's arrest and his surprising response had spread like wildfire through every terminal, office, and break room. Airport staff shared knowing looks as Officer Parker walked his usual rounds, now with a notably different demeanor. The morning sun painted the airport terminals in warm golden light as Michael returned to work. Just 3 days after the incident, he could have easily stayed in his corporate office, but that wasn't his style. Instead, he was back in his pilot's uniform, preparing for the morning flight to Los Angeles. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," called out the security staff as he passed through the employee entrance. Their greetings carried a new note of respect, not just for his position, but for how he had handled the situation. Even the cleaning staff and baggage handlers stopped to wave or nod. At the security checkpoint, a young officer carefully checked his credentials, her movements precise and professional. "Thank you for your patience, sir," she said, handing back his ID. "We've already started implementing some of your suggested changes in our training." The news had reached far beyond the airport walls. Local papers ran stories about the incident, but they focused on the positive outcome rather than the controversy. Airline CEO turns wrongful arrest into training opportunity. Read one headline. Social media buzzed with comments from people sharing their own experiences and praising the constructive response. Catherine Walsh, the airline's COO, had been busy coordinating with the airport authority to develop the new training program. In her office overlooking the runway, she spread out the draft materials across her desk. "We've had calls from 6 other major airports," she told Michael during their morning meeting. "They all want to know more about our approach." The incident was transforming into something bigger than anyone had expected. What could have been a public relations nightmare was becoming a model for positive change. Even Officer Parker, who had initially dreaded returning to work, found himself involved in crafting the new protocols. "I never thought I'd say this," Parker admitted during a training session planning meeting, "but that day might have been the best mistake I ever made." The room fell quiet, surprised by his candor. "I mean, look what's coming from it. We're actually talking about real changes." Down in the terminal, passengers were noticing differences too. Security checks were just as thorough, but came with more communication and respect. Officers took time to explain procedures when asked, and the overall atmosphere felt more cooperative than confrontational. Michael's flight crew watched him with newfound admiration as he walked through his pre-flight checks that morning. The same routine that had led to his arrest was now being used in training videos as an example of proper aircraft inspection procedures. "You know what impresses me most?" Lisa, the lead flight attendant, said to her colleagues in the crew room. "He could have demanded that officer's badge, could have caused a huge scene. Instead, he found a way to make things better for everyone." The afternoon sun streamed through the terminal windows as Michael prepared for takeoff. From his cockpit window, he could see Officer Parker on the tarmac, properly checking another pilot's credentials. This time, Parker was taking his time, listening carefully, and following the new protocols they had developed together. As the engines roared to life, Michael thought about how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes. The incident had opened doors for discussions about respect, communication, and understanding across the entire aviation industry. In the control tower, air traffic controllers watched as Michael's plane took off smoothly into the clear blue sky. The story of what happened that morning was already becoming part of airport legend, not for the mistake that was made, but for how it was transformed into an opportunity for positive change. 2 weeks after the incident, the airport's main training room was packed with security officers, airline staff, and airport officials. The room buzzed with anticipation as Michael stood at the front, preparing to launch the new training program. The morning light filtered through the windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. "I want to start by telling you a story," Michael began, his voice warm and engaging. "Not about what happened to me, but about my first day as a young pilot." The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. "I was so nervous, I dropped my ID 3 times at security. The officer who helped me that day didn't judge. He took the time to calm me down and walk me through everything." Officer Parker sat in the front row, notepad ready. He'd volunteered to be part of the training team, turning his mistake into a teaching tool. His usual stern expression had softened, replaced by one of genuine interest and commitment. "This new program isn't about pointing fingers," Michael continued, clicking to the first slide. "It's about building bridges. Between security and crew, between officers and passengers, between different departments that usually don't talk to each other." The presentation screen showed pictures of daily airport operations, pilots doing walkarounds, security officers checking credentials, ground crew preparing aircraft. Each image came with a story, a moment where better communication could make all the difference. A young security officer raised her hand. "But how do we stay alert for real threats while trying to be more understanding?" The question hung in the air, touching on everyone's biggest concern. Michael smiled and gestured to Officer Parker. "Would you like to take this one?" Parker stood up, facing his colleagues with newfound confidence. "Being alert doesn't mean being suspicious of everyone," Parker said, his voice carrying the weight of recent experience. "It means being thorough, professional, and yes, understanding. I learned it the hard way. A few knowing chuckles rippled through the room. Catherine Walsh stepped forward with a stack of new procedure manuals. "We've created detailed guidelines," she explained, "but the heart of this program is about human connection, about taking those extra few seconds to listen and observe before jumping to conclusions." The training session continued with role-playing exercises. Officers and airline staff switched roles, experiencing situations from each other's perspectives. Laughter mixed with serious discussions as people shared their experiences and challenges. "Remember the time a passenger tried to bring a live lobster through security?" someone called out. The room erupted in laughter, and stories began flowing freely. Years of tension between departments began to melt away as people recognized shared experiences and common goals. During the lunch break, Michael watched as security officers and airline staff mingled, sharing stories and phone numbers. The walls between departments were literally and figuratively coming down. Even the airport's most senior security officer was deep in conversation with a young baggage handler, both gesturing animatedly about something. "You know what's amazing?" Lisa, the lead flight attendant, said as she joined Michael by the window. 2 weeks ago, nobody from different departments even talked to each other unless they had to. Now look at them. Outside, planes took off and landed in a constant rhythm. Each flight represented hundreds of people working together: security, crew, ground staff, controllers. The success of every journey depended on this complex dance of cooperation. As the afternoon session began, Michael stepped back and let Officer Parker take the lead. Watching him explain the new communication protocols, it was hard to believe this was the same officer from 2 weeks ago. Parker's voice carried enthusiasm and conviction as he shared what he'd learned. "The safety of this airport doesn't depend on how tough we act," Parker told the room. "It depends on how well we work together, how effectively we communicate, and how much we respect each other's roles." The training room filled with nods of agreement. Something was changing in this airport, something bigger than new rules or procedures. It was a shift in culture, a new way of thinking about security and cooperation. 1 month after the training program began, the changes at Philadelphia International Airport were impossible to miss. The morning rush hour had a different feel, more organized, more friendly, and surprisingly more efficient. Security lines moved smoothly as officers engaged with passengers and airline staff with newfound professionalism. Officer Parker stood at his usual post, but everything about him had changed. His once rigid posture was now relaxed yet alert, his communication style open and respectful. As he checked a pilot's credentials, he took time to ask about their flight route and weather conditions, building the kind of rapport that the new training program emphasized. "You've really taken to the new approach," said his supervisor, watching him work. Parker smiled, something that would have been rare just a month ago. "I realized something," he replied, checking another ID. "When you treat people with respect, they actually want to help you do your job better." In the terminal, a small crisis was unfolding. A family was running late for their flight, their young daughter in tears because she'd forgotten her favorite stuffed animal at the security checkpoint. Instead of brushing off their concern, the security team quickly coordinated with airline staff to locate the toy and return it to the gate before departure. "This wouldn't have happened a month ago," Lisa whispered to a colleague as they watched the happy reunion. "Everyone would have been too busy pointing fingers or saying it wasn't their department's problem." Michael's influence had spread beyond security procedures. The airport had started monthly cross-departmental meetings where staff from different areas could share concerns and suggestions. Today's meeting was packed, with ground crew members sitting next to security officers, pilots chatting with baggage handlers. Last week, a security officer helped me spot a potential mechanical issue during a pre-flight check, one pilot shared with the group. Before the training, they might have just reported me for suspicious behavior. Instead, their attention to detail helped prevent a possible delay. Catherine walked through the terminal, clipboard in hand, gathering feedback from various departments. She stopped to watch as Officer Parker handled a complicated situation with a passenger whose passport had just expired. Instead of the confrontational approach that might have happened before, Parker calmly explained the regulations and helped the passenger contact their embassy for emergency assistance. "Remember when we thought this training program would just be damage control?" Catherine asked Michael during their afternoon meeting. "Now we've got airports from 3 different countries asking to implement similar programs." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the runway as Michael prepared for his flight to Chicago. As he walked through the terminal, he noticed small but significant changes. Security officers and airline staff greeted each other by name. Passengers seemed more relaxed, even at security checkpoints. The whole atmosphere had shifted. A group of new security trainees followed Officer Parker, watching as he demonstrated the proper way to check credentials while maintaining positive communication. "The key is balance," they heard him explain. "We never compromise on security, but we also never forget that we're dealing with human beings." In the break room, walls that once separated different departments had been replaced with community bulletin boards. Pictures of staff members working together, stories of successful collaborations, and thank you notes from passengers created a colorful display of the airport's transformation. "You know what's funny?" Lisa said, joining Michael for coffee before his flight. "People keep asking what kind of fancy new technology or expensive systems we implemented to improve things. They can't believe it was just about changing how we treat each other." As Michael walked through his pre-flight checks, he remembered that morning 1 month ago. The same routine that had led to his arrest was now a model for cooperation between pilots and security staff. Officer Parker had even created a training video about it, turning his biggest mistake into a powerful teaching tool. The sun was setting as Michael's plane took off, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Below, the airport continued its endless dance of arrivals and departures, but now with a new spirit of cooperation and understanding guiding every interaction. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning at Philadelphia International Airport. The terminal buzzed with activity as airport's representatives from across the country gathered for the first National Aviation Security Conference. The main hall was packed with eager attendees, all curious about the revolutionary changes that had started here. Officer Parker stood backstage, adjusting his tie nervously. In a few minutes, he would share the stage with Michael to present their story to hundreds of aviation professionals. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed his notes one last time. "Nervous?" Michael asked, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Parker, who accepted it gratefully. "Just thinking about how different things were 6 months ago," Parker replied, managing a small smile. "I never imagined I'd be here, doing this." The conference hall's screens displayed impressive statistics. Customer satisfaction up by 40%, security-related delays down by 35%, and staff morale at an all-time high. But the real story lay in the small daily interactions that no spreadsheet could capture. "Ladies and gentlemen," the conference moderator announced, "please welcome Michael Chen, CEO of Pacific West Airlines, and Officer Robert Parker, to share their remarkable journey of transformation in airport security." As they walked onto the stage, the applause was warm and genuine. Many in the audience had already started implementing similar programs at their own airports, inspired by the stories they'd heard from Philadelphia. 6 months ago, Michael began, his voice clear and steady. "I was arrested while checking my own aircraft." A ripple of knowing laughter spread through the crowd. "Today, I'm not here to talk about that mistake. I'm here to talk about what we built from it." Parker stepped forward, his initial nervousness fading as he faced the audience. "I was that officer," he said, his honesty drawing the room's full attention. "I was so focused on showing authority that I forgot about humanity. But thanks to Mr. Chen's response, my biggest mistake became our greatest opportunity for change." They shared videos showing the airport's transformation. Security checkpoints now operated with both efficiency and warmth. Officers chatted easily with airline staff while maintaining professional vigilance. Passengers moved through security with noticeably less stress. The key was breaking down walls, Michael explained, showing slides of their training program. Not just between departments, but between people. We discovered that strong security doesn't require sacrificing human connection. A video montage played, showing snapshots of daily life at the airport. A security officer helping a lost child find their parents. Pilots and security staff sharing weather updates during morning briefings. Ground crew and officers working together to solve problems quickly and efficiently. During the question and answer session, hands shot up across the room. How did you convince senior management to take this risk? Someone asked. Michael smiled, gesturing to Catherine in the front row. We showed them that treating people with respect isn't a risk, it's an investment. Another participant stood up. Officer Parker, what would you say to other security officers who might resist this change? Parker thought for a moment before answering. I'd tell them what I learned. True authority comes from earning respect, not demanding it. As the presentation concluded, the audience rose in a standing ovation. But it wasn't just applause for a good speech. It was recognition of a fundamental truth about human nature. When people feel respected and understood, they naturally want to cooperate and help each other. In the hallway afterward, airport managers crowded around Michael and Parker, eager to learn more. The amazing thing is, Parker told them, we didn't need expensive equipment or complicated procedures. We just needed to remember that behind every uniform, every badge, and every passenger ticket is a human being. The afternoon sun streamed through the conference center's windows as Michael watched Parker confidently answer questions from his peers. The officer's transformation from that morning 6 months ago wasn't just personal. It had become a symbol of how positive change can ripple out from a single moment of understanding. 1 year had passed since that life-changing morning at Philadelphia International Airport. The early winter sun cast a gentle glow through the terminal windows as Michael walked through his familiar pre-flight routine. But today was special. It marked the anniversary of an incident that had transformed not just one airport, but the entire aviation industry. The changes were everywhere you looked. At security checkpoints, officers greeted passengers with genuine smiles while maintaining their professional vigilance. Pilots and ground crew worked together seamlessly, their once rigid departmental boundaries now just a memory. Even the air felt different. Lighter, more cooperative, more human. Can you believe it's been a year? Officer Parker said, joining Michael near gate C-12. They both watched as a young security officer helped an elderly passenger organize her carry-on items, taking the extra time to ensure she was comfortable and understood all the procedures. Sometimes the best changes come from our hardest moments, Michael replied, checking his watch. In an hour, they would host a special ceremony to celebrate the success of their training program, now implemented at over 50 airports worldwide. The main conference room was already filling up with staff from every department. The walls displayed photographs documenting their journey. The first training sessions, candid shots of security and airline staff working together, news clippings about their success story. One particular photo caught everyone's eye. Michael and Parker shaking hands at that first police station meeting, the moment they chose understanding over anger. Catherine stepped up to the podium, her face beaming with pride. When we started this program, she began, some people said it wouldn't last. They said we couldn't maintain high security standards while focusing on human connection. Well, the numbers tell a different story. The screen behind her displayed the year's statistics. Security incidents down by 55%, passenger satisfaction up by 63%, and staff turnover reduced by 70%. But more impressive were the countless personal stories that had emerged. A young baggage handler raised his hand to share. Last month, a security officer noticed I seemed stressed during my shift. Instead of writing me up for being distracted, she took the time to talk. Turned out I was worried about my sick daughter. She helped me adjust my schedule so I could be there for my family while still doing my job safely. Similar stories poured out from around the room. A pilot described how improved communication with security had helped prevent delays. A cleaning staff member shared how being treated with respect had made her more alert to potential security concerns. Each story built upon the last, creating a tapestry of positive change. Officer Parker, now a senior trainer for the program, stood up to speak. A year ago, I was that officer who let prejudice and pride cloud my judgment. Today, I teach others that true security comes from building trust and understanding. The ceremony continued with presentations from other airports that had adopted their program. Video messages played from security chiefs in Chicago, Miami, and even overseas, all sharing how the Philadelphia model had transformed their operations. As Michael prepared to give the closing speech, he looked around the room at the faces of people who had become more than colleagues. They were partners in creating positive change. 1 year ago, I stood on this same spot and said that every challenge is an opportunity, he began. Today, I see that opportunity multiplied in every interaction, every smile, every moment when someone takes the extra time to listen and understand. The room erupted in applause as Michael and Parker unveiled a new plaque for the terminal wall. Its simple message read, "Security through understanding," because every journey begins with respect. As the ceremony ended and people mingled over coffee and cake, a new flight crew walked through security. The natural flow of mutual respect and professionalism between officers and airline staff showed that their changes had become more than just a program. They were now simply the way things were done. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the terminal floor as Michael prepared for his flight to Seattle. Looking out at the bustling airport, he smiled at how a moment that could have ended in bitterness had instead sparked a revolution of kindness and understanding in an industry where both were sorely needed.